Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Pelvic Health and Fitness Podcast. Today, I am honored to welcome my friend and colleague, Surabhi Veitch. Surabhi, whose pronouns are she, her, aka the Passionate Physio, is an orthopedic and pelvic physiotherapist, fitness coach, and mom of two, whose passion is helping women and mothers feel strong, confident, and pleasureful through pregnancy, postpartum, and perimenopause. Surabhi loves helping people maximize pleasure, mobility, and strength while improving symptoms of prolapse, bladder incontinence, constipation, and pelvic pain. She offers physiotherapy in Toronto, virtual coaching globally, and an online fitness membership called BASE. BASE provides simple and sustainable online workouts for moms through all stages of life. Surabhi's philosophy is to respect the whole human in front of her, including a person's culture, social supports, traumas, level of stress, nutrition, sleep, hydration, and lifestyle. In her spare time, Surabhi loves to dance, lift weights, eat delicious vegetarian foods, and spend time with her family. Thank you so much for being here, Surabhi.
Hey, Rhonda, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you with that intro and just getting to chat with you because
Yeah.
we have known each other from like the beginning of when I started my business, and you were such a key like mentor for me to get my business going. And so I'm really grateful to be here.
Yes, I remember those early chats and just watching you grow and flourish, Surabhi, has just been so awesome to see.
Thank you. You
Yeah.
likewise to you.
Thank you. So let's just start out by, keeping it pretty casual and just could you tell our listeners just a little bit more about you, what got you into the field of physio and then pelvic health?
Absolutely. So I got into physiotherapy because I actually wanted to treat neural clients. So people with spinal cord injuries, brain injuries. I did a field trip in high school to a rehab hospital and I saw how physiotherapists supported people with spinal cord injury. And I was fascinating. I did my undergrad in kinesiology. I did my master's in at U of T, University of Toronto, in physiotherapy. But then as soon as my orthopedics unit hit, I was like, okay, this is where I want to be. I was because I was an athlete myself, I used to cross country ski, ran track, and I've done a bit of everything like swimming, rock climbing, now dance. And so I've always been fascinated by movement and injuries, and being hypermobile, I also had my fair share of injuries. So I got into orthopedics, worked as an orthopedic physiotherapist. I trained to be an FCAMP, which is, manual manipulative physical therapist, cracking necks, backs, all that stuff. And then I realized like this is really not what people need because I still had these women, especially mothers, coming into my clinic with back pain, neck pain, knee injuries, not getting better, not able to do their exercises, canceling appointments because they had children sick at home or this or that. And it seemed like they were always prioritizing everybody else but themselves. And not to their fault. This is just the way the society is set up. And then I became a mom myself and I realized, oh, like this is why those moms struggled. It wasn't that they weren't trying hard enough or that they didn't want to get better. They just had all these other things enter their lives and they weren't able to prioritize themselves. So that's really, I've always been passionate about helping support women and mothers. And then pelvic health came into play through my own experience. I had pelvic organ prolapse after my first child. I had incontinence, a massive diastasis, and I just felt like I went from being athletic and confident in my movement to like that was just snatched away from me. And suddenly I was this sedentary mom who just started knitting. Nothing against knitting, but like I literally picked up knitting because I was like, this is I guess what I'm going to do in my spare time. And everything, I remember my husband and I having a talk like in the first few months, and I was like, I don't feel like myself. I was feeling anxious, depressed. And he's like, what would make you like, what would help you feel like yourself? Like, what brings you joy? Or like, what do you want to do? Um, and I was like, I can't do the things that bring me joy. Like, I can't go rock climbing right now. I can't go for a run because all of those things brought me symptoms. And so it was between my first and second child that I started learning more about pelvic health physiotherapy and pelvic coaching, pelvic fitness, because I realized that I did see a pelvic physiotherapist, but I didn't see the results that I wanted because I was treated just like standard postpartum mom, you need to do Kegels for 6 months and then bridges, and like that should be good enough, right? And there wasn't a consideration of my unique goals as somebody who was an endurance athlete, my unique goals of getting back to those things. I feel like that's what really drove me to enter this field of combining the pelvic health with the orthopedic health, and the coaching part to help people just feel like themselves again and get back to the sports or dance or activities, whether it's hiking with their kids or something simple like sitting at a desk all day with less pain. I want people to get back to those things, without like sacrificing the rest of their lives in, motherhood.
Yes, I love that. And you and I resonate so much on that level that, yeah, I think, pelvic physio has done such amazing things for women. But like anything new and growing, it's going to have its, downsides that I think a lot of what's missing is that
Yeah.
that little, in between time of, yes, getting people acutely feeling better, but then leaving them high and dry for just feeling good for the rest of their lives, right? Like,
Yes,
I think that's where you and I kind of try to insert ourselves.
exactly. We
Yeah,
fill
into
that
that
gap, right?
conversation.
It's a
Exactly.
huge gap that's missing. And
It
like I
is.
attended a dance workshop yesterday, about 60 people. And there was just me and one other person who was a mom that I know of, mind you. But I'm like, why aren't there more like I know so many people who grew up dancing, playing sports. Where are all of them in these workshops or intramurals or, open time at the gym? Like they're just not there. And there are many social barriers, 100% cultural barriers. But it's also like if you don't feel confident in your body again, you're not going to want to go do those things. And that actually ties very well into, what we're going to talk about today, which is I'll let you announce it.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, you and I could talk forever on, fitness and all of these things. However, I would love today to focus our chat on pursuing pleasure and yeah, just basically igniting that pleasure in ourselves again as women. Because yeah, as we get into it, we'll talk about like, do we actually lose it, or is there reasons why it seems like we lose it, right? So
Exactly.
it's been such a cool thing to watch you explore this new niche, Surabhi, and just take it on full steam ahead. So what drove that for you? What, inspired you to start focusing on pleasure?
For me, I actually had a conversation with a friend, and we were talking about who's also a pelvic PT, Dr. Janelle Howell, who is the vagina rehab doctor. And she talks all about, vaginismus, sexual health, sexual dysfunction. And she was just, we were talking and she was like, there's not that many brown women who talk about this. And I know there's a lot of brown women who struggle with sexual dysfunction and pain. And so I was like, that is very true. And oftentimes it's such a sexual health is so deeply connected to not just our bodies, but how we were raised, our religion, sometimes our culture, our environment. So sometimes hearing the same message from someone who either looks like you, has a similar background to you, or similar experience to you is more validating. You do feel like, oh, she's speaking to me too, right? So I started speaking about that. That was number one reason. Number two was like I was looking for more pleasure in my own life because I was, had two kids, pandemic, and like I think we were all to some extent burnt out. Plus, then I started my own business, and I had not prioritized my both sexual pleasure or just overall pleasure. And so I'm like, 2023, this was last year, it's going to be the year of pleasure. And so I was seeking more pleasure in all areas of my life and really putting it at the forefront because so often pleasure is like the last thing on our mind, right? We're going to do chores, cook dinner, kids activities, kids performance recital, and then it's like it's time with your spouse if you have a partner, then it's like pleasure, right? So and then where are you in all that? So I was that's what I was finding, even though I was very aware of like self-care needs and stuff. So last year became the year of pleasure, and I wanted to do a pleasure workshop, reclaim your pleasure, to help people and mothers reclaim our pleasure. Because sometimes it feels like it's lost. It feels like it's like 6 feet underground. You have no idea where it is. And you're just like, I guess this is it for the rest of my life. I guess it was just, like horny and wet in my teenagers or my 20s, and this, just tapers down, right? And we almost hear jokes about it in media. Like if we do hear anything about women's sexual health, it's from a perspective of getting dry or like, not having a libido, and it's the husband usually who wants it all the time in heterosexual couples anyway. So then we internalize that and we're like, oh, I guess I'm just normal like all these other women. But that's
Uh,
not actually true, right?
it isn't true. And I think these conversations just need to be had more often. And I think, especially for you coming from your background, your culture, I'd be curious to hear how that has been for you and just your experience with pleasure, growing up and what you were taught and how that's been to explore into that and sort of like how people in your life have reacted to you being more open about it, which
Mm,
again, I think it should be,
yes.
it shouldn't be taboo. It should be
No, it
normal.
shouldn't be. And so this is like a little mini history lesson. So I'm Indian and I was born and raised in India, which is different than people who are Indian but born and raised in Canada or the US, because there is a different culture that you grow up with. But in India, like back when I grew up in the 80s, 90s, there wasn't any sex in this movies. There wasn't even kissing. Like just as a couple is going to kiss, a lot of romance movies, but then they would turn off screen. So you start to learn, even without someone telling you, you start to learn that kissing is taboo. You start to learn that even holding hands sometimes is taboo. I never saw my parents hug or kiss. Physical affection wasn't a big thing, even for us as kids. That was just the culture. But now let's backtrack to the British rule in India, colonization, and a lot of that prude or like strict, I guess, ways of being came from British rule. Because when you look at history prior to that, Kama Sutra, which is like the sex novel book everybody knows about from India, but it wasn't just the Kama Sutra, but sexual knowledge was included in the education system in like 1700s, 1600s, even early 1800s. Then when the British came, everything was like, oh, that's dirty. You're dirty if you practice yoga. You're dirty if you um, meditate. You're dirty if you talk about sex. Cover yourself. So the clothing even became more um what's the word I'm looking for? Prim and proper, right? Like more respectful or more British, right? So
Yeah.
it's that element of now Indians themselves, because of the long history of colonization and the impact of the school system and the education system, now Indians have absorbed that. And how many Indians actually know their own history? Not many. And so now we, even parents, have internalized that as our own culture. So now Indian culture has become super prudish and there is a lot of taboo around it. And that's a problem because India has one of the highest rates of vaginismus, which is a fear of penetration that actually causes the vagina to close, to not allow any penetration, whether it's a penis, a toy, a finger, even a Q-tip, right? So if these issues are so common in cultures, and religion also ties into this, right? Because people in more religious families, they have more sexual shame. It's just not even a topic that's ever talked about. And then those people are more likely to have sexual pain, dysfunction, and disorders. So for me, that was my kind of background. I actually didn't really uncover all this until I got married and had kids.
Yeah.
Because when you're younger, and I was thin, I was relatively fit, I was socially accepted as, somebody who could be considered attractive, right? And so I never really felt judged for my body in the same way that maybe I would after having kids. And this is speaking from a space of very, thin privilege. For people who are in larger bodies, people who are on black bodies, disabled bodies, they're feeling that pressure even before they have kids. So they might have to face those truths earlier on. For me, I had to face that truth after I had kids because I was like, why don't I see myself as sexy anymore? I don't want to put on lingerie. I don't even think of myself as deserving of sex. Like that's the point I had gotten to. And so often women feel that, their bellies are loose, they have stretch marks, they have boobs that are leaking. And so for some women, they find that really sexual. But for others, especially if you grew up in a home or culture where that was never talked about in the first place, what you're absorbing is from pop culture. And pop culture, we see thin, mostly white, young bodies portrayed as sexy. And so the further away from those norms you get, the less likely you're going to feel sexy unless you're doing your own inner work to combat that. Right. So that's where I started to really like through therapy and through even just like books and having open conversations, I started to unpack that. And I'm like, why do I not feel this way anymore? Because it wasn't my husband making me feel that way.
Yeah.
This was internal. And it took
Yeah.
me a long time to even have that conversation with my husband. And he was shocked. Let me tell you, he was like, what? And I was like, I was bawling, I was blubbering with tears when I was talking about it because it was so emotional to me. I and I hadn't even realized that, right? And so I think those are the, I guess, my background to now.
Yeah.
But the beauty is a lot of my Indian friends now throughout who I met through dance, the younger ones, they were in their, I call them kids, but they're like in their 20s. They love my content and they're learning so much because they also grew up in similar households. And just because we have access to the internet and porn and all of the other things that are online doesn't mean that is going to help you learn, right?
Right.
Sometimes it actually does more harm than good.
Yeah. Well, because then it feels more that you have to do those things behind closed doors. You can't tell anyone
Yes,
if it's not
exactly.
talked about openly, right?
And the bodies that you see, right?
Yeah.
Google sexy body, sexy woman. You're never going to see someone who looks like, like there's not, it's not a normal representation of all
No.
bodies. It's
No.
always the same look. And so you start to internalize, I guess that's what people find sexy, right? And so for
Yeah.
me, it was like unpacking all that, which I'm still working on unpacking. It's not like it's fully unpacked. Like I always,
Like
I love the
time.
analogy of a suitcase and it's full to the brim. And then you like take out some stuff, you can like, you think it's good, and then you got to take out more stuff and more things are uncovered. So we're still removing all the layers and peeling back and seeing like, okay, now where am I in my
Yeah.
pleasure journey, I guess.
Yeah, I love that analogy too. And then taking stuff out, but then also putting new stuff in, right? So you have to take stuff out
Yes.
to make room for new stuff too, right?
Yeah. And the
Uh,
new stuff that you put in can hide some of the other stuff. But until
yep,
you're like fully uncovered all that, I think you can't be fully sexually liberated.
totally. I'm curious, have you had chats with your mom about this, or what is her take?
It's funny because my mom is like my biggest fan with my content and stuff. And
Yeah,
like I know she's reading everything, but we never really, we have talked about it. And in the sense of, so I was sexually abused when I was 19. And so that is something that I never openly talked about. Um, my family didn't know. And that's something I told my parents actually in the past few years. And they were in shock, right? And so often I think we don't talk to our kids about sex so they don't get in trouble, right? But I was 19, I wasn't young, and it was something out of my control. And I wasn't dressed like a slut. There was no reason that should have happened except for the fact that I was abused, right? So
yeah,
that was a conversation. My mom was like so heartbroken when she found out and she felt guilty. And it wasn't my parents' fault by any means. However, I do think that educating your kids about their bodies, helping
yeah,
them feel more confident to say no, right? People who grew up in really strict households where discipline was like, really strong discipline, yelling, hitting, abuse, all that stuff, they might have trouble saying no, or they might
yeah,
get themselves into environments that are unsafe. And so we never blame the victim at all, but I do want parents to educate themselves so that they can also educate their kids on sexual health and what's normal sexual
yeah,
well-being and what's normal pleasure, so that especially as girls they don't grow up the next generation of girls always prioritizing penis and vagina sex because that's what they think is normal, or
yeah.
always prioritizing male pleasure because that's what we always see.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Surabhi. And I'm sorry that was your experience. But I think even in that scenario, had you had maybe more open and honest conversations, you would have felt comfortable telling your parents sooner, right? And not
Exactly.
having to deal with that shame,
For like
for
I'm
years on your
really
own.
thinking about it, almost 20 years I carried that shame.
Yeah,
And so it's like, and I didn't realize how much I needed to unpack that because I was like, I'm fine. I got over it. It's okay. But I wasn't. And so it wasn't until I started like the suitcase, it was
Yeah.
buried deep. And so until I uncovered other layers and then other layers. And so I really look at like pregnancy and postpartum and having kids obviously as a beautiful gift because it's your kids and what you want. But it's also a beautiful gift in the sense that it really forced me to look at things honestly, and uncover a lot of those insecurities and that shame that I was just pushing to the side so that we often think we push it away, we can't see it, so it's not there. That's not true. It's there. And in some way or the other, it's impacting your health or well being or both. And so it was impacting my sexual well being for sure and my pleasure. Like
Yeah.
I was like, I have low libido. I can't orgasm or as well, or it's not as good as it was before. It takes way longer. There's all of these things that I had to work on. And so when we approach things from a purely physical perspective, what will you be given? Maybe some Kegels, maybe some exercises, strength or mobility. But that's why that whole person approach for me is so important is like, what are some other layers going on? Do you need to see a therapist or a sex therapist or a counselor or include, your family in some of these discussions so that you can unpack some of that shame and let it go, right? Um,
For sure.
and like, I don't know what the quote is about shame, but the more you talk about it, more things come to light, the less shame exists, right? So I always
Right.
look at it like your shadows grow more when there's less light on it. If you have
Yep.
direct sunlight, you barely have a shadow. So it's the same thing. You shine the light on the things that you feel ashamed about or that you are struggling with. And sometimes those shadows decrease. You start to realize,
Yep.
oh, that burden isn't mine to carry. It's gone. It's lessened.
For sure. Yeah. And just being open to share those things with your partner, right? Just,
Yeah.
yeah, I think pleasure is not just physical, right? It's the emotional connection we have with our partner too. So having those deep conversations is what's going to help you experience more pleasure in the
Yes.
bedroom too, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And there are some people who can have it purely physical. They have a terrible emotional relationship, but they're having great sex. And that's fair, but I would say that's not the average couple.
Yep.
And the average couple, it's not like that the male always wants it and the female doesn't. Because that's not true either. Often it's females who really want it, but they're not getting good sex. So they want sex, but it's not fun for them. So you're like, "Ugh, I'm not going to bother, right?
Yep. Yep.
Or they might give themselves pleasure or which is also great. I also recommend that because the more pleasure you have, the more easy it is to achieve pleasure. So
Yep.
it's like the more fit you are, the easier it is to go try out a new workout class, right? So the more
Yep.
pleasure you have, the easier it is to have more orgasms, even with a partner or by yourself. So I definitely find that if sex isn't good, you're not going to want it. And that's going to impact libido. And so there's this myth that like women have low libido. And I'm like, I think a lot of women are just having bad sex. Because when you look at same sex couples, that same thing doesn't exist because
Right.
especially, in female relationships, women know each other's bodies. They know what feels good. They're not just giving 2 minutes of foreplay and then penetration right away. Like
Yeah.
those are things that I wish were common knowledge, but they aren't. And that's why, we need to talk about it.
100%. I actually would just think random like analogy that popped into my head the one day I was driving home that so we're not, we are taught that like the penis is the center of pleasure for men. We're not openly taught that the clitoris is the center of pleasure for women, right? We were just taught
Exactly.
like penetration sex should be pleasurable for men and women, but
That's what we
that's not,
see in the movies. Like the woman's like,
yeah,
oh, and like 2 minutes later, she's orgasming. Like, seriously?
exactly.
And
Yeah,
that's why people feel shame. And when you tell them that's not true, there's like, I think only 19% of women can actually orgasm through penetration alone.
yep,
The other 80+% need manual oral stimulation or penetration with manual or oral
yes,
or digital or toy stimulation, something else. Because the clitoris is the center of pleasure, and the penis isn't even the center of the pleasure. It's also, it has multiple functions. The clitoris, the main function is pleasure.
right, right,
And it also relates to fertility because when you experience more pleasurable sex, it also helps with fertility, right? You have better lubrication, you have better muscular pelvic floor contractions, which can help that sperm travel upward. So people don't realize that pleasure is not just obviously it's just for the pleasure part too, but it can also impact fertility, mental health, your relationship, your mood, and your life expectancy. Because when you have more pleasure, you also improve your heart health. And so that also can help with life expectancy and just quality of life as we age. So, another reason to prioritize that pleasure.
Sure.
Again, whether it's solo or with your partner.
Yes. Yeah. The analogy I had in my head though, as I was driving was expecting a woman to orgasm without clitoral stimulation is like expecting your car to go without stepping on the gas.
Oh my gosh, exactly. You're like pressing the brake and you're thinking, why is it not going anywhere? Right?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's a
Yeah.
beautiful analogy.
Yeah.
That's
And I
so
wish more
true.
women knew that. Like I think I'm so thankful I have, a group of friends and we're really all open with each other. So
Amazing.
yeah, we've had really good talks about this. And I remember my friend, I was probably like early 20s. She bought a vibrator for me. She's like, Rhonda, this will change your life. And I'm like, what? And yeah, things like that. Again, it should be common knowledge. It should be talked about. It should not be taboo. And yeah, again, I think these conversations, I'm so glad are starting to happen more. So yeah, you've talked about libido a few times. So let's get into that a little bit. If, a client comes to you, says, I struggle with low libido,
Yeah.
if someone's listening and they're like, yes, that's me, or I think I have low libido, my husband or my partner has stronger libido than I do, we don't match.
Yeah.
What are some strategies? What are some things you talk about to, again, maybe it's not a low libido issue. What are
Yeah.
some things you talk through with them?
So usually if someone's coming in with low libido, it's usually they don't come in with low libido. They come in with, because people have low libido for a long time. It's usually when their husband is now like threatening to leave, or they're afraid their husband's gonna, leave them because they just never want to have sex. It's usually that, right? And we live in a patriarchal society where the man threatening to leave is more important than your own pleasure. People rarely come in because they're like, I want to experience more pleasure. And that's step number one. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, I have low libido, and you're like, I have low libido, do this for yourself. Get help for yourself, not for your partner, not to have more sex with them, but for yourself, for
Yes.
all of the benefits that we just talked about. And so number two is when you have a libido, we do a full screening questionnaire. Not like I'm just asking you questions from a questionnaire, but I want to know about your life, your stress levels. Do you have capacity in your day to experience pleasure? We all do. And then first step is recognize the pleasure that already exists in your day. It could be that hot cup of coffee. It could be putting on a cozy sweater. It could be lighting a candle. Like it could involve your senses. What already brings you pleasure? Start to notice those things and then expand on them. Because sometimes we're so focused on all the things that are not going right in our day, and then our focus on that expands. Let's start focusing on what is going right in your relationship, in your day, uh, in the bedroom. What is going right? What feels good? Expand on that. Oh, I really like it when my husband rubs my back. Okay, ask him for a 20-minute back rub. Rather than saying, I hate when he rubs my back, it feels good for 2 minutes and then he just goes right to this. Okay, but then let's talk about it. And so we're also afraid of like hurting our partner's feelings. But I have also heard from people who are like, my partner was really hurt that I didn't tell them this for so
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
Right. Because they don't, assuming you're in a good, healthy relationship, they want you to feel pleasure. It's not that they want you to fake it. And even if you faked it for 20 years, you can still have good sex. You can still learn on, communicating your needs by asking for what does feel good. And if you don't know what feels good, start with the exploration. And I usually say explore outside of your pelvis because yes, the clitoris is, our primary pleasure sense, but we have pleasure areas all of our body, our neck, our ears. People have different kinks and different things that set them off, right? And sometimes you can orgasm even without touch if, it's erotic, for obviously people watching porn, but like it could even be dirty talk. Like there could be so many ways that can improve somebody's arousal, right?
Yep.
The other thing the research shows is that couples that talk about sex more, it doesn't even have to be just about like dirty sex. It can just be about sexual needs. People who talk and communicate openly have better sex, which
Yep.
makes total sense. And so even just, and it also increases libido. right? So if you're talking to even your friends, like you said, you had some friends that you talked to. I had like one friend, one roommate. We used to talk about it openly. But what I notice is once you're out of your 20s or you get married, you have kids, you start to lose the amount of friends you have sometimes that you see regularly. And then the conversation changes to kids, kids, family, family. And sometimes you almost feel like it's awkward to tell your friend about this because you don't want them judging your husband or something. It's not about that, right? It's just having these conversations also improves your libido. You can learn from your friend, hey, my husband took me to this thing. That really helped me. Oh, okay. Right. So it's less from a judgy perspective and more from a get some ideas. Let's explore what can increase your libido. Definitely, I recommend seeing their doctor or their naturopathic doctor or dietitian for nutrition support because many people are not eating enough. They're not getting enough fats to help hormones. If they have hormonal, just for low progesterone, low estrogen.
Yeah.
If you're breastfeeding postpartum, your estrogen is lower, so your libido is going to be lower. That's a normal change postpartum. It doesn't mean that until you're done breastfeeding, your libido is going to be low. It just means that you may need more oomph, more boost before that car starts running, right? Going back to that
Yes.
gas analogy, you may need to
Yep.
just, it may not be as sensitive a gas pedal, so you may need to push a little harder. And that doesn't mean rub the clitoris harder. It means you may need more of that warm up. Maybe you do need a date night every Thursday night and actually have time where you like put on regular clothes and not your, mommy outfit that you usually have on,
Yes.
not for your partner, but for yourself, right? Because
Yep.
sometimes we always assume everything's done for your partner, but sometimes you just want lingerie for yourself because it
Yeah.
feels nice. And so those are some strategies that you can use to help build libido. And then the biggest thing is movement. Are you exercising? Because if you're not, how are simple ways we can build in movement, both cardiovascular and strength, so that you have better blood supply to your clitoris, blood flow through your organs? Every single person, even my kids know the term erectile dysfunction because we hear it on the ads every day on the radio. Half of men over 40 have erectile dysfunction. Now, if you consider that, probably half of women over 40 also have clitoral dysfunction because of our heart health and like as we get older, we have more atherosclerosis, and the arteries that go into our pelvic organs are smaller than the ones that go into our heart. So if you have any blockages that go into your clitoris, that can also impact things. So this is kind of going back to that holistic nutrition and exercise component. Because when you're exercising more, your libido is going to be higher, usually.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, exercise like swimming, walking, even lifting weights, you get that little endorphin rush. You feel more confident too when you're moving. People who
Yep.
exercise, and it's not about how your body looks at all. It's
Yep.
just about how it feels after you exercise. You get that little like nice high. So working out with your partner, you both sweating together, releasing those pheromones, that can be a nice way to bond and also boost your libido. I often get people doing like a sexy time, like 5 minute, 10-minute stretch routine before bed with their partner. And it's just emotional connection is also being built then, right? It's not just the
Sure.
physical part, but I felt emotionally disconnected to my husband and he's fantastic. Like, but
Yep.
you just don't spend that much quality time together because you're always doing something for your family or chores
Yep.
or kids. And until you're in that life stage, I think it's really hard to understand why that happens. But anyone who's listening to this who is a parent will probably be like, yep, been
Yeah.
there.
For sure. Yeah. And I think I find for myself, I don't know if you find this, prioritizing exercise for me is just that proof that I deserve that. I'm
Yes.
worthy of prioritizing my physical health. So I think that then carries over into like I also deserve to prioritize my pleasure and my sexual health
Yeah,
too, right? So it's like that easier
exactly.
bridge for people. So like
Yes.
if you learn to set a boundary, like, no, right now is my workout
It's
time.
my protected time. I don't care if
Yep.
you're whining at me. Kids,
Yep.
you're going to hang out. You can watch me work out or you can play beside me. But yes, exactly. It's your
Because I
protected
think
time.
that that's part of it, right? I think, men culturally were raised to prioritize their needs, and a lot of
Yes.
women, socialized women have not been, right? So I
Yeah,
think that's the biggest first hurdle for people too, right? Is like, I deserve to prioritize my needs, which
exactly.
that's like a human need, right? But like sometimes we need to be coached into it.
Listen, for me, it's not movement. I've always, been okay prioritizing my movement. For me, it's the food. I used to skip breakfast because I don't have time for breakfast. And then I'm like, I would never let my kids leave the house without breakfast. Like I would
Yep,
never not let my kids eat a meal. We always make a break in the day for them to eat, even if we're out all day. But I'm not giving myself that. And it's so basic, but it's like, and it's not even from a point for me. I don't have like that, oh, I need to lose weight or I need to not eat for that. For me, it's just I'm too busy. And then when you actually unpack that further, it goes back to what you're talking about with that deserving of food, nutrition, nourishment. And then that's definitely going to tie to pleasure because if you're sacrificing your basic needs of eating for the day, of course you're probably sacrificing it all in the bedroom just for the sake of your partner, right? So
for
it's
sure.
it's all interconnected. And once you start to improve one area of your life, it all, bleeds into the next thing.
Yep.
Right? So, okay, movement is good. And last year was my year of pleasure. This year is actually year of like discipline, not in a negative way, but eating is a big part of my goal for this year is like
Yep.
making myself a breakfast that I feel pleasure eating, that I actually enjoy and I'm not like, oh, a sludgy bowl of oats again. Like for me, that's not, doesn't do it. And so I'm like, why don't I make it things that I actually enjoy? Because guess what? I've skipped breakfast for decades, but now that I'm starting to make breakfast that I actually enjoy, I want to eat breakfast. And that same thing goes with sex. If you
For
have
sure.
good sex that you actually enjoy, you're going to crave it more. You're going to want it more. And so that is a couple's responsibility if you're having a partnered sex. And that's the other big thing is couples or people who involve their partner in the physiotherapy or in the sex work will have better response because you then feel supported, right? If you're having low libido, if you're having trouble orgasming and your partner attends the appointment with you, you learn those strategies together. You learn about the importance of foreplay and how to approach foreplay together. And then that way you don't have to then go home and teach your husband or partner, this is what my physio said. And it's kind of awkward and embarrassing. Let me do the
Yep.
embarrassing, awkward work. So you can just then reap the benefits
For
for
sure.
yourself.
Yeah. And, going along the foreplay theme, I think that is part of it too, is just, you've sort of redefined pleasure. Like pleasure doesn't have to just be sexual pleasure. Pleasure can be food and exercise and, things that just help you feel good in your day. I think we need to redefine sex too, right? I think,
Yes.
again, in our society, sex is deemed penetration, but
Yeah.
sex is so multivariate, right? So I think, yeah, foreplay is part of that. And foreplay can include conversations, right? And having
Yes.
those talks with your partner that get
Yeah.
you in the mood and get you connected,
Exactly. Or
right?
like texting
That's
in the
the
morning, like, I'm excited for tonight. So this is what we used to do pre-kids, like, oh, date night, like, I'm so excited. And now it's like, where are those texts? Where are those, the way we communicate? So of course, then when it's time to, and usually people do it in the evenings at bedtime and everyone's
yeah,
exhausted. So I often say, try in the mornings, like on the weekend. And if your kids wake up early like mine, that's really hard to do. So it's for people who maybe their kids sleep in or whatnot, because sometimes our libido is higher once we've rested. Once
mhm,
we're just like men get erections, we get little mini clitoral erections too. So when we're already relaxed and maybe your lubrication is easier, you get wet easier. Of course, use lube, but don't just I find people jump to lube without giving their bodies enough time to actually warm up and like
yeah,
get into
and just
the
go
mood
right to penetration, right?
and right to
Without,
penetration.
yeah,
And so for
yeah,
people who define sex as penetration, then they might be having bad sex. But if you define sex as oral, as touching each other, kissing, making out, as anything you want to define it as, you could have the best sex without
yeah,
even any penetration,
for
right?
sure. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think again, just, people listening that the goal is not always penetration and the goal doesn't always have to be orgasm either, right? I think that, of
Yes.
course, and if you want an orgasm, go figure out how to have an orgasm for yourself because yeah,
Yeah,
it's
sometimes you need one and sometimes
yeah.
I mean, they feel great, but you're right, is like there's no end goal with sex. Like
No.
there's no finish line. The point is it's a partnership, if you're with a partner or partners, if you're with yourself, it's quality time spent with yourself, exploring a sexual pleasure need. If you have
Yep.
done that, then then redefine that as a successful, sexy encounter. If you
Totally.
always say, I didn't orgasm, I guess that sucked. But you're like, wait, I kind of really enjoyed that oral, but I didn't orgasm. So you can just say, I really enjoyed that oral. That felt good. I connected with my partner. I enhanced my sexual pleasure, right? Sometimes if you're under stress, especially, that is a libido killer, that is a pleasure killer. And so sometimes maybe you can't orgasm all the way, but just that added bits of pleasure makes you feel loved, connected, and you can sleep better at night. So
Totally.
you didn't fail, right?
Yes. No, it's not all or nothing, just like exercise, right? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Yeah.
Yes. There's so
Yeah.
many parallels, right?
Oh, for sure.
And
Yeah.
that's what I love is like once you, as a pelvic physio, right? Like I understand that my scope of practice is more, okay, let's talk about your pelvic health, pelvic floor, your glutes, your whole core system, your body moving well, feeling well. But it's also the strategy part. Are you incorporating those things for your foreplay? Are you
Yep.
incorporating stretches at the right time? Are you drinking enough water? Because your vagina, or your vulva needs to create some lubrication. It's not going to create something out of nothing. So many people are drinking 3 cups of coffee, 1 cup of water, 2 cups of water a day. That's probably why you're dry and why your muscles feel tight and uncomfortable during penetration or during anything. And so muscles that are plump and juicy, think of like a grape versus a raisin, right? You dehydrate that grape, it becomes tough and wrinkly and doesn't taste as good, in my opinion. But when you're well hydrated, it's like plump and juicy and better, right? So
Yep.
drink that
Yep.
water. These are simple things that we can be doing that we don't realize make such an impact, right?
For sure. Yeah. And yeah, I feel like you touched on vaginismus, but I think, as a pelvic floor focused physios,
Yes.
let's just touch on just pain with sex, because I'm sure that is a huge deterrent for folks that,
Yeah.
just have that painful response that for sure they're not going to want to seek out pleasure. So what would be your recommendation if someone, every time they have penetrative sex, there's pain? What
Yeah.
would be their first step?
In the short term, avoid penetration and focus on penetration free sex. So oral, manual, toys, anal, like there can be so many different types of pleasure. And it can be even outside of the pelvis, like we've talked about. But then you teach your brain that pleasure is not bad, right? At least then you get a better relationship with pleasure. And then at the same time, seek pelvic physiotherapy because we work on exploring pain-free penetration and help you break down scar tissue if you have scar tissue, help you stretch, help you release, help you control, have better control. And sometimes people have trigger points deep in their pelvic floor and they just keep massaging with the wand and they're just massaging every time thinking, why is it coming back? A lot of them need strength because if you have better strength in your glutes, your adductors, your bigger global muscles around the hips, your pelvic floor can chill out. Right now,
Yeah.
your pelvic floor is doing the work of like 10 people, 10
Yep.
muscles. And so when your pelvic floor is so overloaded all the time and you're holding your breath, sucking your belly in all day because you're stressed, all that added pressure goes down into the pelvic floor. So as we learn to breathe, as we learn to strengthen everything around it, suddenly people are like, oh, this actually doesn't hurt as much, right? Regardless of how much pain you have, whether it's vulvodynia, pain around the vulva, so external, whether you have pain around the vestibule, so that's just the opening, or vaginismus, where you have pain internally, or vaginismus is also that reflexive kind of contraction of the vaginal muscles. And unfortunately, many doctors will be like, just use dilators. Now, the problem isn't that your vagina cannot open, it's that it does not open.
Right.
So that is a fear, pain avoidance based response. And that can be, it's more common, like we talked about, culturally, religious influences, and people who've experienced childhood or adult sexual or physical abuse. It's just your body trying to protect you. It's not doing anything wrong. I actually think vaginismus is a very normal response, for certain situations. I had a patient with an abusive ex-husband. She has vaginismus. I'm like, that's normal. And when she heard that, she's like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. Like if you put your hand on a hot stove, it's going to get burned. And then when you near the hot stove again, your hand's going to snap back, right? It's going to be
Yep.
like, no, don't do that again. Same thing with your vagina. So it's not uncommon. And some people are surprised. They're like, I have a great spouse though. Like, I don't know why I have this. Sometimes you just don't know. It could be things you experienced in your childhood. It could be intergenerational things that live in your genes, in your body. It could be so many things. Stress
Yep.
is a big one, right? So we can do so much. So don't lose hope in your vagina and your sexual health.
Yes. Always changes to be made. Yes, for sure. So yeah, we've had such a great, thorough conversation. And, again, for folks listening, if they're tuning in and they're like, how do I kickstart or supercharge my pleasure? What are some tips that you would sort of summarize from our talk
Okay.
today?
So basic things is talk about sex more. If it's not your husband, your spouse, talk about it with a friend, someone else, a therapist, a physiotherapist. So talk about it. Um, I actually have a 5 letter acronym that
Okay.
helps you boost your pleasure, your libido, and your sex life. And it's semen. I know. I had to
Love
pick
it.
a male
Love it.
thing.
I
Semen,
love it.
right?
Give it to
So
us.
S stands for sleep. People who have even one more extra hour of sleep at night boost their libido. If you're not sleeping minimum 7 hours every night, your libido is probably going to be low. Or you're going to be the opposite. You're going to be seeking a lot of sex to kind of help with your exhaustion, which is we see all the time too. So sleep. E is express your needs. So this goes back to what we just talked about, is that open communication. Start by expressing your needs outside the bedroom. If it's really awkward for you to express your needs in the bedroom, you can say, I really like it when we snuggle on the couch, or I really like it when you buy flowers, like, or, something simple, right? I love when you tell me how good I look when I'm wearing this outfit. And it sounds silly, but sometimes people have to be told because they are not mind readers. And
Yep.
this goes both ways, right? So it's not just like the men can't understand. Sometimes women, like I'm sometimes like, oh, I didn't know I wasn't doing that. Or, you just
Yep.
need to be told sometimes. So sleep, express your needs. M is mindfulness. So practicing mindfulness, presence in your day. If you can't be present because you're always thinking about your to-do list, grocery list, your kids, whatnot, you're not going to be present during sex either. Your mind is going to go away. And when your mind has left the body, it's very hard for your body to experience pleasure, because pleasure is not just a clitoris thing. It's the clitoris and mind and everything, right? Everything connected. So we want your mind to be present. And the way you're going to practice mindfulness is start with 1 minute a day. So you wake up in the morning and start with mindful breathing. And so just note your breath going in, note your breath coming out. And if your brain gets distracted, like it will, that's okay. Just refocus and just give yourself 1 minute a day. Start there if you've never practiced it. And then you start to practice those same skills when you're eating. Notice yourself chewing, put the phone and screens away, distractions away, and start with a minute. Sometimes we tell ourselves we have to practice 20 minutes of meditation, but the mindfulness meditation literally start with 1 minute, right? So SEM. E is exercise, because we've talked about it extensively. Exercise is so important. And it doesn't mean, like, some people are like, but I have chronic pain, I have disabilities. It doesn't mean you have to like go for a run. Exercise might
Yep.
mean something else to you, but it can still get your heart rate up, get yourself moving a little bit if you're able to. And then the last N is nature. So getting out in nature, getting outdoor time, being in I live in the city. Listen, this is like urban jungle, but there's still parks, there's still trees. Getting outside always makes me feel better. And I actually think it's crucial for us as as people of nature. We're animals as well. We need to be outside and not just in our little homes, in our boxes, watching TV. So it's really important. Even 10 minutes outside in nature can help you reset and kind of feel more in your body. So, semen.
Seaman. Love it. So good, Surabhi. And so, yeah, that's awesome. That's a great little wrap up. Is there sort of one overarching take home message that you want to leave our listeners with today?
Yes. Um, Nothing is too broken to be fixed, right? Whether it is your sexual health, your relationship, if you want to fix that. But mostly your relationship with yourself and your own body. Nothing is too broken to be fixed. Like I just shared, I didn't explore something in my life for almost 20 years. And we've just unpacked that and I'm way better off for it. And I think that was a big key in opening myself up to more pleasure as well. So, no matter what your history is, your background, your culture, your story, your life, nothing is too broken to be fixed.
Beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much, Surabhi. You're amazing. And if, folks are listening and they're like, how do I work with this woman? How can people find you and how can they work with you?
So virtually in across Ontario for physiotherapy and virtually globally for kind of that coaching approach. I work in Toronto as well in person. So all of that you can find out at www.thepassionatephysio.ca for Canada or Instagram is where I usually hang out at the Passionate Physio. Send me a DM, say you heard Rhonda's podcast and you're like, I'm interested in support for this and we'll get something set up. There's mostly people just need virtual support for this unless they have like vaginismus. Even still though, there's so much we can do virtually and often people are more comfortable in their own home environments than like in a clinic and having to like spread their legs on a table. And sometimes people feel awkward with that, but we are experts in this and we will make you feel safe and comfortable regardless. Internal exams are never mandatory. So that is the other thing. People assume they have to get their fingers up in their vagina if they see a pelvic physio. Not at all mandatory. It's always just an option. So find me online.
Awesome. And I'll put all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much,
Amazing.
Surabhi. It was such a pleasure having this chat with you today.
Yes, I love it. Thank you, Rhonda. I love this conversation. We could literally
Yes,
go on forever. And I
I
love
know.
that. I love that you're also talking about this. And I know you were at my workshop last year. So
Yep.
thank you for being there and supporting. We're just continuing on this pleasure revolution.
Honestly. And I think for me, getting into pelvic health and that focus has really, yeah, opened my mind to, again, nothing is taboo. Nothing is TMI, right? It's just bodies. We're
Yes,
living on this earth to enjoy it. Why shouldn't we be talking about these things?
exactly. Nobody would be like, oh my God, I tell my friends, oh, I got a cavity. Like it's just like no big deal, right? Oh, I
Yeah.
need a root canal. Like,
Yeah.
okay. With our teeth, we're very comfortable. Our mouth, we're very comfortable. But the other lips down there, if there's any issues, we're just like, ooh. And that's because, again, society, but we can unpack
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And the way that starts is one conversation at a time with whoever you feel comfortable with, right?
And we can change that moving forward. I think, I'm being so conscious about how I talk about these things with my kids, right? And I
Same.
think, yes, of course, there's age appropriate ways to talk about things,
Yeah.
but like it's okay to say penis and vagina, right? I
Oh,
think
they say it
there is,
every day. And
yeah,
my my son, yeah. Oh, is that now they call things that look like vulvas? Oh, that looks like a vulva, like a leaf or something.
I
Oh,
love
that
it.
looks like a penis. Like it's just normal for them. It makes
I
sense.
love
And
it.
I'm like, why not?
Yeah, even my 6-year-old daughter the other day, because I've been open about my period and just
Yes,
shown them
same.
the Diva Cup. And the other day, just out of nowhere, my oldest daughter was like, Mommy, when will I start to bleed from my vagina? And like such an honest, beautiful question. I'm like, good question, kiddo. Like, this is the average age, and when you
Yeah,
get there, we'll talk about. And I felt proud of myself in that moment that it
because
was just
she's
a
learned that from
nonchalant,
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was just a nonchalant, like, when will that happen to me? And I was like, this is so cool. I love
It
it.
is. It is. And for me, I have a daughter and a son. I think sons also need to know this information. So he knows when I'm on my period. He helps me get my cup or my period underwear. He wants to look in the toilet. And some people are that's gross, but I'm like, they're just curious kids. And let's
Yeah.
normalize that. They like looking at your pee and poo. It's period stuff. So it's just for some people, the idea of sex is so shameful, but maybe periods is more approachable of a topic. So you could start that, start
Yeah.
there and have those types of conversations first, and then kind of go more into that pleasure
Yes.
conversation. But I love it. Our kids, I'm so excited for them. I think I have so much hope for the future. I
Same.
did an event last year where I was in my community doing I had a booth, pelvic physio booth, and I did a pelvic health Jeopardy game. And the kids or the people who got most of the answers right were like teenagers. They
Love
know
it.
so much more about their bodies than we did at that age. And they know more than the adults today. And some of the moms of those teens were kind of peeking over their shoulder, like, oh, okay. Like, that's where your clitoris is. Like, and no shame in if you didn't know, because I mean, nobody taught us. But it just makes me so excited for the kids of the future because they just have a better understanding of their bodies and their needs and their rights.
100%. Yeah, I'm excited for the future as well. Well, I'll really let you go now, Surabhi. Thank you so much for joining me
Thank
today.
you
It
for
was a
having
great
me
chat.
too.